In Kansas, 72% of fourth graders can't read at grade level. But what if the problem isn't the kids? It's the system that taught them. I'm Jessica Glover, and this is My Child Can't Read, a Heartland Crisis, a documentary-style podcast about how thousands of smart, capable children are being left behind and what parents and teachers are doing about it. In this season, we trace the forgotten history of reading instruction, hear from families who were told to wait it out, and uncover how widely used methods fail to teach the most foundational skill in education. You'll meet teachers who were taught but not trained, and students who were mislabeled, misdiagnosed, and nearly gave up. But there's hope, and it's already happening in Kansas classrooms. This is a story about loss, about learning, and about what happens when people refuse to give up on kids who struggle to learn to read right now.
Hi, I'm Austin Collins. I'm 17 and in 11th grade, and I go to the independent school. I was featured in episode 1 of this podcast, Reading for You. I am happy to report that I recently got a 33 out of 36 on my ACT reading section, and I will be reading for you a bit today. I will be reading from the book, Undiagnosed: The Ugly Side of Dyslexia by Amir Baraka. Introduction. I am compelled to write about how learning to read saved my life. How I broke free of the school-to-prison pipeline. How one diagnosis of an invisible disability called dyslexia became a doorway out of prison and a pathway that led to Hollywood's doorstep. I am obligated to every young child and grown adult who cannot read yet, to share my life story in hopes that a different tomorrow is possible. If I can read, then I can dream.
Just a few years ago, when Austin was 6, he was struggling in ways only his family could see. He felt defeated, sad, and down on himself. He thought he was dumb, and his self-esteem was low. Teachers and classmates thought he didn't want to learn, but the truth was he was trying his hardest. He just wasn't being taught in a way that matched how his brain learns. It was a bad experience for him, and it left him frustrated and misunderstood. But now, he's 17. And he's easily reading a 7th to 12th grade level book and seeing a future where anything is possible. That transformation didn't come from guesswork. It came from research, from science, from people who knew what to do. And in our season 1 finale, we ask, what if every child had access to that kind of instruction? What if Kansas, yes, Kansas, became the place that finally got it right? The Crossroads. Let's be honest. For decades, Kansas and most of the country has been stuck. Stuck with disproven theories, stuck with curricula that focuses on guessing instead of decoding, stuck in the fallout of what educators call the reading wars, the decades-long debate over how to teach children to read. If you missed earlier episodes, here's a quick recap. The reading wars pitted phonics, explicit instruction in sound letter patterns, against whole language, the idea that reading is caught, not taught. Out of that battle came a middle ground called balanced literacy. But in practice, that balance often left out the critical science of how kids learn to read. And the results are clear. In Kansas, only 28% of fourth graders are proficient in reading according to the NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, also known as the nation's report card. A link to NAEP can be found in the show notes below this podcast. For students with dyslexia, that number is even lower.
Hi, I'm Renee Erickson. I'm a senator from District 30 here in East Wichita. I'm a retired educator and principal. I have a passion for education because I think it sets the foundation for our health and our community well-being. And literacy is probably the most important part of that. If we can't get our kids literate, then it's detrimental to us. And so I think that's got to be priority number one for education. And so I'm following this and leading the charge on this in the legislature and as an educator for many years. We are in a literacy crisis. We've seen scores go down. We've been on a downward trend for quite some time. And I think we're finally to the realization that we are in a crisis. We are below the national average on NAEP and ACT. And if we don't reverse this trend, we're just going to keep going in a spiral that's detrimental to our kids and our families and our communities. So how do I believe we can solve this? I know we can solve this because research and experience tell us so. There's been a number of statistics thrown around a lot that 95% of all kids can learn to read given the right instruction and intervention. And it's interesting because a researcher by the name of Nathaniel Hansford did a study. He dug into that because he thought 95% sounded high. And he wanted to make sure it was based on research and actual scientific-based research, not just some anecdotal number that people were throwing around. So he looked at the literature and he dug into the research and came to the conclusion that he thought 95% may be low based on what he did in replicating some of the studies, Jorgensen and Mathis, that actually might be closer to 97%. So we know that given the right instruction, given the support, that 95 to 97% of all of our students can learn to read. We are currently in Kansas at about 30% of our kids proficient. So we've got a lot of ground to make up. And we know from experience, because we all talk about the Mississippi Miracle. We all hear about that in education circles, how they went from being the second to the last state in the country on fourth grade NAEP scores to 22nd in 2022. So huge gains there. And this is with kids who are low income, high poverty kids. We tend to think that, they struggle more, and they do. But look at the results that Mississippi had. Alabama is replicating that. So we know that if we train teachers properly in the science of reading, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, if we do what we know works, we'll get those same results in Kansas. And so we've got to look at the research, we've got to learn and do the things that we know are working elsewhere.
We've heard the science on how kids learn to read has been there for decades. What do you think has kept us from putting it into practice in every classroom?
I can go from my experience as an educator and what I've seen. And in general, it seems to me like the education establishment just is apt to jump on every new trend that comes through, educational. We don't want to get left behind if there's a new, better way of doing something. And so we jump on things probably before we should and adopt them before thoroughly vetting them. I think that probably happened here. I think we had some teachers who thought that the way we teach reading in the science of reading, it's systemic. It's very concrete. You learn how, phonemic awareness, that letters make sounds and you put those together, and it can be kind of dry and boring. And I think teachers thought, well, maybe there's a more exciting, innovative way. And I think that's probably how that was packaged and sold, that if we created a literacy-rich environment and just immerse kids into that, they would somehow pick up on reading like they do the spoken language. Well, we know that's an unmitigated disaster when it comes to teaching kids to read. The thing I struggle with, honestly, Jessica, is why it took so long for us to reverse course. Why we let a couple of decades and generations of readers get lost in that before we took corrective action. We can't go back. We can't undo that. We shouldn't guilt anybody. Teachers were teaching the way they had been trained. Parents were listening and doing the best they could. But we know what works, and we've got to get back to that and reverse the trend that we're on. And I know we can.
Hi, I'm Kathy Hopkins. I am on the State Board of Education for District 5. I also, for this year and next year, have been voted in as the chair of the State Board.
So, Kathy, when you look at reading outcomes in Kansas, what do you see? And why do you believe this is a crisis that we can solve?
I do believe, with everything I have learned about the science of reading, about what Phillips Fundamental Learning Center has been doing, the conversations that I've had listening to Soul the Story, like the more information I've taken in, the more I know we can solve this crisis. We can see our kids do exactly what they need to do, which is be very literate people and be able to do what they want to do, to have that impression in and of themselves that they are learners and that they can learn, and that struggles don't define who they are. We just keep moving and we can make it happen. And I've heard too many stories and too many testimonies of how doing it the right way makes all the difference in the world. And so I'm excited about what we can do.
We've heard the science on how kids learn to read. What do you think has kept us from putting it into practice in every classroom?
And this is from my understanding, from what I have listened to and garnered from. Part of me feels like all that science came in, and as hard as Dr. Lyon worked, it was the how it was done. I think in the end, that was the struggle. It was coming from the federal level. When you have anybody who's been doing something they feel like is the right thing, and they have outside entities coming in and telling them they're wrong, we have to be really careful how we do that. When we say that this isn't working and we need to shift, because we get into defensive modes and then we don't want to hear. So, it's really a struggle. We've had so many voices talking in the education world about what does and doesn't work. We have publishers that push their curriculum and their ideas. There's so many voices. I think it's a real struggle for all educators to know what's the right thing. So the more we work together in taking on the information, understanding that the science is real, that is so important and crucial to making sure children can decode and understand. But we have to work really hard within our state to be one voice in this is what works. And we have to work together. I think everybody gets frustrated, and we definitely know our kids are frustrated. I also believe we're seeing behavior issues we're seeing in schools because kids are frustrated, and if they feel dumb, they're just going to find another way to get attention. It's a defense thing, right? So it's just so important that we're paying attention. Mm-hmm. And in our communities, you have angst with the schools or, parents, the community, like money's being spent, what's happening, like you just get a lot of frustration and build up and unfortunately a lot of blaming, where we really have to come together and be like, okay, what can I do? What is my part? How can I help? And thankfully we now have dyslexia on the state list. It can be diagnosed, it can be dealt with. So my prayer is that we have turned the right direction and we can really get down this road and make a big difference in our communities, because without literacy, what do we have? It is the basis for everything. I'm so encouraged, Jessica, that you guys are doing this.
Yes.
I think this is powerful, and we have to keep finding those ways of promoting, right? And sticking together. And so we help each other that way. So it's really important that we stay in that place. And I just I don't want educators to feel like they're in a corner, having to be defensive. We're all on that same page. We all need to understand how we take the knowledge and move it into the classroom. Well, I can't do that. I love connecting. So if we can connect people together to make sure that they're getting what they need, that's just huge to me. And that's why we have PFLC and Read Redefined on that at-risk list, as well as the Seal of Literacy list.
Yes.
Because educators can use that at-risk dollars to get the training that they need. So if their district's struggling, know that they have a pool of money that they can use. Right now, the foundations course is actually part of the blueprint, so it is paid for by the state too. So we're working very hard at the state board level to make sure we have all the tools they need to get that training.
Next, we hear from Dr. Megan Steele, a Kansas State representative for District 51, who is a nurse by trade, but has been in education for the past 13 years. She shares that her passion for literacy scores improving first stemmed from her time teaching nursing school, where she observed students lacking basic reading, writing, and math skills. This clued her into there being a nationwide literacy problem. And personally, as the mother of a daughter with dyslexia and dysgraphia who was not diagnosed until the 4th grade, you can tell this issue hits her both personally and professionally. So when you look at reading outcomes in Kansas, what do you see, and why do you believe this is a crisis that we can solve?
When I look at it, my heart hurts. It's really, really sad to see the state of our reading literacy in Kansas. And I don't think that we can really stand by and ignore it too much longer, because our students are falling behind and our communities are really going to start feeling the repercussions of that long-term impact. Just looking at our 2024 data, I know our 2025 data is still a little skewed and up in the air, but if we really look at just 2024, only 28 to 30% of our 10th graders were proficient in reading, which means that this year they are going out into the communities, and they are seniors in high school, and they're going to be going out and they're going to be looking at what their future holds. And if only 28 to 30% of them can read, that's a disaster waiting to happen. And I also feel that Kansas has poor reading rates because we haven't consistently taught reading the way that science proves that it works. We haven't given teachers the training and the tools that they need. And then there's a whole nother sliver to that, and I think that it's that we have allowed distractions and discipline issues to erode classroom learning time. The science has been there for decades, but teachers haven't been trained. They have not been trained in structured literacy. They have not been trained in phonics. So they've entered classrooms completely unprepared for how to teach reading. I have teachers tell me all the time, I've not ever been taught how to teach reading to kids, and that's what's really sad and concerning. So I do think in Kansas we're starting a good path. We're requiring that literacy seal on their teacher license so that we know they have been trained in letters, which is a phonics-based program. We've also provided extra funding at the legislative level to ensure that professional development is being focused on literacy. But while all of this is helpful, we still need to make sure that our teachers are meeting those state standards, that we are meeting those proficiency levels. So we need parents to really hold their schools accountable to make sure that they're meeting those standards.
The state mandates, but are we ready? Kansas has taken steps, big ones. By 2028, most elementary teachers and all elementary administrators will be required to demonstrate their knowledge of the science of reading by either completing a state-approved training program or taking a state-approved competency exam. The completion of the program or exam will result in a seal of literacy added to the educator's teaching license. According to the Kansas State Department of Education, this ensures all Kansas elementary educators will be familiar with the science of reading, how the brain learns to read, and what it takes to reach every student. According to ksde.org, the Kansas State Department of Education website, elementary educators and administrators must complete either the state-approved training or the state-approved exam by July 1st, 2028. The state has approved 5 literacy training programs from which teachers may choose. Those options include: first, letters; second, keys of literacy; 3, AIM pathways; 4, foundations of the science of reading course; 5, structured literacy intervention specialist, alphabetic phonics introduction; or 6, READ redefined or read defined. Letters, or Language Essentials for Teachers of Reading and Spelling, is a 2-year professional learning course developed by Dr. Louisa Moats that provides teachers with the theory of the science of reading, also known as SOR, in the science of how children learn to read, or again, SOR, which includes phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, reading comprehension, and fluency. It's not a reading program or curriculum, but a deep dive into the knowledge and skills teachers need to understand structured literacy. In other words, it offers a powerful foundation, but not the full set of teaching tools. As in all purposeful trainings that are meant to transform students' lives, application, coaching, and mentoring for the instructor must be present. These are the critical missing components of letters. But here's the catch. Letters training, which for a while was paid for by the state, is the theory behind the science of reading. Although it is strong in in-depth knowledge, it is weak in classroom application. Letters helps teachers understand structured literacy, but doesn't provide a curriculum to apply the knowledge in the classroom.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Brooks, and I've been a teacher for going on 17 years, the first 10 in private school and the last 7 in public school. When I got my education degree was back in the 90s, and it was all whole language, units of study, and I did not go straight into the classroom from that point. Life took me in a different direction. And then when my kids were starting school, I was looking at how I wanted to enter back into that. And so I started substitute teaching, and then a friend shared with me about alphabetic phonics at the Fundamental Learning Center. And so I took the first class, and it just made sense to me. And I remember asking specifically, how successful is this program? Because I'm not interested in another program that, isn't successful with most kids. And when I heard it was 95% of students at average intelligence were able to be successful with the program, I was just completely intrigued. From that point, that kind of launched me into working with kids who have learning differences. And then eventually I started developing a real passion for public school education. I thought about those kids who maybe don't have the opportunity to pay for extra services and things like that. So that's when I really wanted to bring what I know about structured literacy into a public education classroom. Well, a large part of letters training, because it is a great deal of information, and the information is incredible, but we have to learn how to transfer our information to practical application. And so, of course, there is a bridge to practice component of letters. And as much as teachers are able, I really encourage teachers to take that part seriously, and trainers of teachers and, the academic coaches that are in the building, to try to keep that accountability high for the application part, because if they're not applying it, it's kind of meaningless. And so some districts have materials that they can easily incorporate into what they know, and some don't. And so I think teachers are having different experiences with the application piece.
Yeah.
And it has to be a system within the school or within a grade level, whoever's doing the training, and there has to be some accountability there. And I know that's looked to different places, but that's so key. And if they don't know, then they need to take it a step further and get help knowing how to apply it. Like if they don't have clarity about that, though, it's just critical that if a teacher feels like they don't understand it, or they're not sure how to implement it, that they just take that next step and ask for help. I try to say in our district, it's kind of like trying to turn like the Queen Elizabeth. Like it's just this incredibly large, all the schools, all the teachers, all the knowledge, all the training. And I have great faith in our district ELA leaders. They are right there with us, and it's solid. But trying to get that system in place with fidelity and get everybody trained with clarity it's just huge, and it takes time. We're starting to see growth as long as our teachers are doing things with fidelity, that clear, explicit, direct instruction, solid routines that kids, they don't have to spend their cognitive load of knowing, okay, what's next in the schedule? What are we going to do? They just know this is the routine, so they can get into it, and then just getting that immediate corrective feedback. Let's not learn it wrong, right? Let's learn it right from the get-go, and build on that at our lower level elementary, our K1, 2, and then it's starting to pay dividends. But it takes time.
At Phillips Fundamental Learning Center in Wichita, Kansas, we believe every child deserves the power to read, especially those with dyslexia or learning differences. We start with a personalized literacy assessment so parents and students can finally understand how a child learns and what support will truly help. As a nonprofit, PFLC offers more than hope. We offer real solutions: intensive research-based instruction, training for parents and educators, innovative tools like the Sound Case, Fundamental Case, and Grammar Case, designed to strengthen reading, writing, and spelling at home and in classrooms. All of this happens in our state-of-the-art 37,000 square foot facility where students learn, parents heal, and teachers grow. And the impact is real. PFLC has helped hundreds of thousands of children unlock the joy of reading. Families and educators across the country call our programs life-changing. You want to learn more? Visit funlearn.org or call 316-684-7323. Tour our campus, schedule an assessment, or support our mission to change a child's future. Phillips Fundamental Learning Center, where reading begins and hope never ends.
In Kansas, teachers are doing the work. They're rising to the challenge. But policy without appropriate application, it's a setup for failure. That's why implementation matters. And it's why we want to show you what real training and support look like. We've seen the data, we've seen the pain, but now we're seeing the transformation. That's what happens when educators get evidence-based training. That's what happens when schools shift their approach to match what science tells us about learning to read. That's what happens when parents and teachers say, our kids deserve better, and we won't stop until they get it. Your role in the movement. Here's the truth. Reading is a civil right. Let's act like it.
We have to make literacy the non-negotiable priority in every Kansas classroom. So every Kansas teacher must be trained and supported in the science of reading. We have to hold schools accountable for actually moving students to proficiency. We're not just passing them grade level by grade level, we're moving them to true proficiency in reading. And parents have to be able to receive that transparent information, whether or not their child is on track or not, and what can we do to help them get on track.
Advocacy begins with one brave step. If you're a parent, ask your school how they're preparing teachers to teach all kids to read. If you're a teacher, demand tools that match the training. If you're a policymaker, please fund implementation, not just legislation. Together, we can speak up at school board meetings, organize in our communities, and insist on instruction that truly works. Every voice matters, especially yours.
The Commissioner of Education, Dr. Watson, for months and months, he would make the statement, our hair needs to be on fire about teaching kids how to learn to read. And I will tell you, the more I educated myself, I was able to look at him one day and said, the hair's on fire. Like, we have to be that passionate because it is a civil rights issue. It is the reality of the basis of society. We have to have literate, and there's no reason they can't be. Yeah. That's the part that's so huge that we have to understand. We can do the right things. Yeah. As parents, as educators, all of us. We can know enough and we can help those who are really in the trenches, our educators, to have the tools they need and be able to move this thing, because Kansas can make a difference we can make a difference in our state and we can make a difference in our nation. We just have to have the desire and the passion and let our hair be on fire so we can just keep going.
Well, I know you've talked to a lot of families and just the angst of, I know my child is struggling and the helplessness that they feel. So, that's devastating. And we know that if a child isn't reading proficiently by third grade, it's very difficult for them to catch up. So I think at that personal level, it's very difficult for the child. They struggle and they act out. And for families, they feel the guilt. We don't know what to do. As far as the community, we know the economic costs of illiteracy. The World Literacy Foundation has estimated that in the U.S., we lose over $300 billion a year to illiteracy. And worldwide, it's over $1 trillion. And so we know the economic impact. Businesses, when you've got, employees that aren't as literate as they need to be, they make mistakes. You have to retrain. Socially, we know that, and this is a statistic that has been prevalent and blows my mind, that 85% of kids in juvenile detention centers are illiterate, 85%. And you look at not just, the impact of their behavior, but the missed opportunity for them to be contributing members and being as successful as they should. And translate that to adults, we know that illiterate folks are more apt to be unemployed and on welfare, but more importantly, they're not reaching their potential, and we know we can do better. For parents, I would say, ultimately read to your children, make it fun, interactive, turn off the TV, put down the tablet and the cell phone, pick up a book, read with your kids, make it a fun, enjoyable time. Start to instill the love of reading early in your children. For teachers, advocate in your school for the resources and the instruction to make sure that you are teaching kids according to the science of reading. And by golly, be a bulldog in speaking to your principal. Parents, make sure your kids' schools are teaching reading the right way. And for policymakers, I think we need to hold our schools accountable. We fund schools. We spend over $6 billion of state money to educate our kids. We're almost at $20,000 per pupil in the state of Kansas to educate our kids. The money is there. We need to make sure our schools are accountable to putting it to the resources to do priority number one, which is help our kids read.
You are not alone. As we close season 1 of My Child Can't Read, A Heartland Crisis, I hope these stories have given you clarity, connection, and courage. Whether you're a parent, a teacher, or someone who simply cares, remember, you are not alone. You are not to blame, and you have power. But our journey doesn't stop here. Before we launch into season 2, we've got a very special bonus episode, Hope and Heart, Transforming Literacy at PFLC, featuring Tammy Hope. You won't want to miss her story of what happens when a school dares to do things differently and succeeds. Then, in season 2, The Anatomy of Change, we'll dive deeper into what it really takes for communities, schools, and systems to rise together and turn research into results. Because when it comes to literacy, we don't have to wonder what works. We just have to choose to do it. Until then, share this series with someone who needs it. Call your school board or legislator and join the movement by sharing your story at funlearn.org/podcast. That's funlearn.org/podcast. Because when it comes to reading, we can get this right. And Kansas, we're at a crossroads. Let's choose the path that leads every child home to literacy. Thanks for listening to My Child Can't Read, A Heartland Crisis. If today's episode resonated with you, if you saw yourself, your child, or your classroom in these stories, you're not alone. We believe every child can learn to read, and every parent and teacher deserves the knowledge to help them. I invite you to take action today by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode, rate and review to help others find this series, and tell us about your story and discover how the Phillips Fundamental Learning Center is changing lives through literacy at funlearn.org/podcast. That's funlearn.org/podcast. And share this show with a friend, teacher, or fellow parent who needs to hear it. All resources, source credits, and tools mentioned in this episode can be found in the show notes. Remember, together we can rewrite the story, one reader at a time, right here in the Heartland.